Hey everybody, my name is Deja and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about my favorite books of 2023. This is one of my absolute favorite videos to film every single year. I love talking about my favorite books and just like chatting with y'all and like expressing my love for all these books. And if you can't tell, I'm at home. I forgot how much I really enjoyed this setup. We're just gonna get straight into it. I have 20 books that I'm gonna be talking about today, 10 honorable mentions, and then my top 10. They're not gonna be in like any particular order except my last book is definitely my favorite book of the year. Now that we've gotten through that, we're just going to talk about some of my favorite books. So first up for honorable mention, I have Midnight is the Darkest Hour by Ashley Winstead. This one is one that I enjoyed much more because me and Haley, we did a live show discussion with Ashley Winstead about this book and just about her in general, and she actually told us an alternate ending to this book, and ever since then, like, that's like canon in my head and I can't get it out of my mind, and I keep thinking about it over and over and over again. So maybe it's not fair to say that this is one of my favorite books of all time, but just like in general, I loved that idea so much and I enjoyed this book so much in the discussion that I had to include it on this list. We followed two characters, a boy and a girl, and the girl, she is the pastor's daughter, and then the boy is kind of like the boy from the wrong side of the tracks, and they kind of committed a murder a while back and they bonded because of this murder. Now present day, they are digging up skulls in the same swamp that they got rid of the body, so they are now convinced that somebody knows what they did, and they are trying to figure out about these other murders because their like skull was not the only one found. There was other ones found that were proven to not be the person that they killed. It was somebody else, so they're convinced that there's kind of like a copycat killer, and it's just so good. This one is very much like romance heavy though, so if you don't really like romances in your thrillers, I would kind of just be wary of this one. But I have heard a lot of people who don't like romance and thrillers still really like this one. It's definitely like a character study. It's dark. It has a lot of religious trauma in it, and I just enjoyed the religious trauma talk so much that, yeah. And then the alternate ending, like, and then next up I have Woman Eating by Claire Coda, and this is one that I really enjoyed, and I feel like the best way to describe it is what it says on the back. A young mixed race vampire must find a way to balance her deep-seated desire to live among humans with her incessant hunger in the stunning debut novel from a writer to watch. This one, literally as it says, is about a mixed race vampire who she has this very incessant hunger to just drink blood and drink human blood, but she obviously doesn't want to do that, and she wants to live amongst humans, and she wants to live very much a human life. And this one is another big character study, even more than this one. This one has a lot of plot. This one is pretty plotless, I would say, but I just love the discussion so much. And then also she's mixed race and I'm mixed race, so I really enjoyed seeing that, and I really just thought the discussions around being mixed race were done very well in this book, and it was something that I was able to relate to a lot. And I love the like metaphor symbolism behind vampires. I think that it is stunning when it's done in books. I think that that symbolism just comes through so much. I just loved it. Next up I have a manhwa, and that is Killing Stalking. This one actually really surprised me. I didn't expect this one to end up on my favorites of the year, but here it is. This one I would not recommend to the faint of heart because this one is a lot. It has a lot of darkness to it. If you cannot handle like extreme horror, I wouldn't recommend this one because it is very dark. We follow this boy named Yoonbum, and he is obsessed with this other boy. They've known each other for, or I shouldn't say known each other. Yoonbum has known about him for a very long time because they like briefly went to school together. They were in the army together, stuff like that. But this other boy never really paid any attention to him. But Yoonbum is like obsessed with him, like yandere type levels. And so he ends up like figuring out the passcode to get into his house and goes into his house. And when he's there, he finds a woman tied up in the basement. And then the guy that he has a crush on comes back and basically knocks him out. And so Yoonbum is like, okay, so like I know I broke into your house, but like I'm low-key obsessed with you even though you kidnapped this woman and have her tied up in your basement. So yeah. And then the guy that he has a crush on ends up taking him basically as a sex slave, and they have basically a relationship. It has like a lot of torture in it, a lot of very like horrible things that like you would never condone in real life being in a relationship. Like you would never ever in any world condone what happens in this book, but something about it, it's just like so like horrific that like it's like a train wreck, like you can't help but watch. And I heard the more that you read in this series, the more stuff happens. I haven't read the rest of the series, but I'm excited to continue on, and it just really had me gripped and captivated. Next up is a thriller that I really enjoyed, and that is Not So Perfect Strangers by Ella Stratton. This is one that I read just a couple months ago and I really enjoyed a lot. This one follows a woman and she is in a very abusive relationship, so she ends up leaving, like gets the courage to leave, and she takes her 18-year-old son with her because she does not want to leave him alone with his horrific father. So they leave, but in the middle of the night, the son ends up leaving, and he left a note that was like, I miss my friends and my girlfriend and dad, so I'm gonna go back. And so she's like, I can't leave my son alone with this monster. So she ends up driving back to her own personal hell. But while she is driving back, a white woman pounds on her window of her car and is like, let me in, let me in. And we follow this other woman who's a white woman. The main woman that I was talking about, she's a black woman, and this white woman pounds on the glass. She lets her into the car, and she also kind of has a very toxic marriage, and they have very different everyday realities, but they both have marriages that they need to get out of for one reason or another. And I just enjoyed this one so much. It is very much like a classic thriller, but it has a lot of discussions about the differences between black people's reality and white people's reality, and also like abuse and how that shows up for black people and for white people, and how they can be very different but also still toxic at the same time. But domestic abuse is such a big, important issue within the black community. It's huge. This is something that we talk a lot about in my sociology classes, and seeing that in a book, I just was so glad that we were able to get that representation, but then also have it in like a very fun thriller. Next up is one that is a amazing short horror, and that is Goddess of Filth. This one I absolutely loved. This is what I wanted my best friend's exorcism to be. Basically, we just follow a group of girls who are kikiing one day, and they decide to do like a little like seance type thing, and some weird things happen, and their friend like starts to speak in tongues. It's just kind of strange, but then the friend comes to and everything like that. But then after this event, she just keeps acting a little strange, and she may or may not be possessed. This one, as I said, this is what I wanted my best friend's exorcism to be, and it had so much rich Mexican culture woven into the story. I just absolutely love this one so much. If you're looking for something that's like a possession horror, and you really want something that's diverse with a lot of culture, but then it's also pretty short and dark, and it's almost giving like the Craft vibes, this is the one for you. It's like My Best Friend's Exorcism mixed with the Craft, mixed with Mexican culture all together. That's what this one is, and it's just so phenomenal and so good. Next up, I have Them by McKay Watson. This is one that I read earlier this year that is extreme horror, so I will preface with that, by a fellow booktuber, and I really adored this one so much because of the commentary really about how humanity is depraved and horrific. And this one you wouldn't think necessarily would talk about humanity specifically, because this one actually is about a woman named Jeanette, and she one day is just like sitting at home relaxing with her dog. You know, she just thinks like it's gonna be an average day, but then her TV show is interrupted by a broadcast basically being like, watch out for them. And then someone comes knocking on her door that she believes is a friend, but actually is a clone of her friend, because there in this world now has been this invasion of these clone people who behave and try to act like people that you love and care about, but are actually very murderous and out to kill and torture people. And so even though this one follows about like clones, we don't really know what they are, if they're like aliens or what, but there's something, and you don't really know what they are, and that's terrifying. But then also you see how this like almost like apocalyptic type world that now exists because of these clones, and how other people are taking advantage of that, and how humanity's taking advantage of kind of like this anarchy, and that is also very terrifying. I love this so much, and it literally made me throw up. I've never had a book make me throw up before, but this one did that. Another one that I love that also has very similar themes is No One Rides for Free by Judith Sonnet. This one is about a mother who is taking her two college-age students back to college, and she goes into a gas station really quickly just to pick something up, and while she's in there, a man gets into her car and starts starts holding her 2 children at gunpoint. So when she gets back in the car, she's now stuck with this person and she has no idea what they want, and what they want is literally to be horrific. They don't want money, they don't want to be driven anywhere, they don't want to even just kill them. They want to torture them and cause them immense pain. And this one has a lot. It goes very dark, very, very extreme. So if that's not something that you can handle, please be careful of this one just in general. But again, this one talks about how humanity is very depraved and humanity will do things just for the sake of being horrific and not for any other particular reason. And I just love this one so much. Switching gears, I now have a romance, and that is Goal by Alexandria House. This is one that I absolutely loved. It is a hockey romance, which I've never really seen a hockey romance written by a Black author. I've seen another one before, but this one was phenomenal and I'm so glad that I was able to find it. We follow Malik, and he is a hockey player, and his whole entire life is hockey, but he ends up gaining some responsibility. Basically, 2 of his siblings from his dad's other marriage, who are literal children, end up in his lap, and he now has to learn how to take care of them. But he can't do it alone, especially with his job, so he ends up hiring like a nanny, and that's where we meet our female protagonist. And this one is just such a good short little romance, and I adored it so much, especially because it's a hockey romance. I love hockey romances, I love sports romances, but it's hard to find specifically hockey romances, again, that are Black. So I was really glad that I was able to find this one, and I love when we see children in these types of romances. I love that so much. Not even like just necessarily children, but having a responsibility of children and seeing the bonding between the children and like the other person. But we're not just seeing that, but we're seeing both characters trying to bond with these children, because Malik was never really in their lives in the first place, but so is our female protagonist Nuri, because she is obviously new to their lives as well. And I just really love children and romances, so the fact that this is Black, hockey, and has children, it was gonna eat every time. Next up, I actually have a fantasy, and that is Every Heart a Doorway by Shauna McGuire. I love this one so much because it actually has like a murder mystery element to it that I was not anticipating, because I never hear anybody talk about that. In this one, we follow our main character Nancy, and she is a part of these children that go to other worlds, and they basically get teleported into these worlds through these doors, and then they come back, and usually there's like a lot of trauma associated with that, because generally these worlds were really amazing and they wanted to stay, and for some reason or another they're not there anymore. So we follow basically Nancy as she's going to this home called Eleanor West's Home for Wayward Children, which are these children that go to these worlds and then come back. This home is basically a place to rehabilitate them, and I love this one so much. As I said, it had a murder mystery element, and I really want to get back into fantasy. I'm not sure why, but it's just something I really want to do, and this one is really helpful because it's so short. That is one thing that really intimidates me about fantasies, that they're so long, but this one is very short, and I think that this was just like my perfect fantasy. And lastly, to finish off my honorable mentions, I have Black Sheep by Rachel Harrison. This one is such a fun one. We follow our main character, and she basically was in like this cult when she was growing up, but she left. And this is the type of cult where like when you leave, you can't really go to like birthday parties, you can't go to weddings, you can't really have any communication with those people once you're an outsider. But she ends up getting an invitation to one of her family members' weddings, and she realizes that she needs to go because they are actually marrying her ex. And obviously that's a big betrayal from both her family member and her ex, that they are marrying each other. So she ends up going back, and they did invite her back for a reason that we all find out eventually that is very horrific. And this one is a very much like cult vibes. If you enjoyed The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, it is more leaning towards that direction, where it is kind of like Satanism, but like magical in a way. And I just enjoyed this one so much. It definitely gave me those vibes, and I missed The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. I missed that show. It definitely went downhill after, in my opinion, the second season. So I really missed the first and second season of that show, and this one was able to really give that to me, especially because in the first season of that show, we are kind of surrounding this big event of Sabrina's birthday, which is also Halloween, and in this one we have like that wedding aspect to it. Next up, we are moving into my top 10, and I have The 7 Year Slip by Ashley Poston, which is a romance that really surprised me. It really took me off guard, and I did not anticipate loving this one as much as I did. We follow our main character Clementine, and she just kind of wants to keep her head down and keep her heart safe, so she just kind of stays busy with work and everything like that. and she is also grappling with the death of her aunt. She was very, very close to her aunt, and her aunt died by suicide. So this one has a lot of talk of losing a relative by suicide, which I thought was such like a much needed depth to the story. I like my romances that have a little something extra to them, whether it is a little darkness to them, whether it has a little like emotional depth to them, something. And this one had that emotional depth element that I really, really loved. So she's grappling with that, and she's actually living in her aunt's apartment. And one day when she comes back, there's just a random man in her apartment, and she ends up bonding with him. He really wants to be a chef, but turns out he actually lived in that apartment 7 years prior when her aunt was leasing it out. And this is kind of like a time loop apartment where she is present day and he's 7 years in the past, but her and him end up crossing paths in the current day as well, which is 7 years in his future but her current day. And so she is kind of bonding with him in the past, his 7 years prior self, but then also trying to bond with him current day. And he's very different, and his life is in a much different place than where it was 7 years ago. And I just love this one so much. Like, I don't know what it was, but like I literally was like almost in tears while driving listening to this audiobook, because it just touched my heart so much. And I don't know, something about their connection I just thought was done so well, but then also adding again this element of emotional depth and nuance. I just loved it so much. So next up I have a manga, and that is Uzumaki. This one I read towards the beginning of the year, and it stuck with me all year. We follow a girl, and she basically lives in this town that is being overtaken by spirals, and there are basically chapters to this one. For the most part, in the beginning half of the story, we are kind of getting like little short stories that are taking place within this town, and then it all comes together in the second half. And this one, Junji Ito just has some of the most intense graphic imagery that I've ever seen. That is not like, I don't even know how to describe it. It's not bloody, it's not gory, but it's just very graphic and horrifying. And something about it just really disturbed me on a different level. And I'm not scared of spirals or anything like that, but this one had me genuinely scared. And I was like, okay, this was like the first manga that I ever really read, so something about it just really clicked with me. And I love Junji Ito's art style. I love his way of storytelling. I love his imagery. I just think that he is such a phenomenal artist and storyteller that I had to include this one in my top 10. Next up I have another romance actually, and that is What a Match by Mimi Grace. This one is actually the second book in the series. I have not read the first one, but I was really happy to read this one. And this is one that I again read earlier this year, but that's really stuck with me for the whole entire year. And so this one follows our main character Gwen, and she is just like in this place in her life where she's like, okay, like I'm 30-ish now, and I am tired of being alone, and the dating scene is just not it, so I need some professional help, aka a matchmaking service. So she signs up for this matchmaking service, and she is like, okay, nothing is gonna come between me and finding the love of my life, but she does have her brother's grumpy best friend sleeping on her couch. So we also follow Anthony, and he runs a boxing gym with Gwen's brother, and they are basically best friends, and he's having some apartment trouble, so he ends up having to crash on her couch for a little bit. And he's always been drawn to her, but something has just kind of kept him away. He ends up kind of bonding with her through this time that they are stuck together in the same apartment. And this one is not one that necessarily has a lot of emotional depth or nuance to it, but I just loved it so much. And this one definitely is like a fall read. There's a scene with a pumpkin patch in it that was absolutely hilarious that I think about regularly, and that is very rare for me. There are very few times that I really think about a specific scene in a book, and this one has one of those scenes in it, so that definitely says something about the writing and just like the connection between the two main characters. I love a black romance. I feel like something about black authors, they just write a connection like nobody else does, and this one is obviously written by a black author, and so something about that connection just really was so strong to me, and I really just felt like, okay, this is like an OTP. Like Gwen and Anthony, they belong together, and nobody could tell me otherwise. And if they break up, if they don't stay together, then I don't believe in love anymore. Next up, I have a horror, and that is Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. This is one that I absolutely loved. It was actually, I think, my first read of the year, and it stuck with me, again, the entire year. Literally the very first read of the year, and it's still here. This one follows a marine biologist that went underneath the ocean, and she actually got stuck on this expedition for way longer than she was supposed to, with no communication to the outside world. So she ends up coming back, but she is very much changed. So we are following her as she is in this expedition underneath the ocean and what happened, but then we're also following the perspective of her wife as she is kind of grappling with the difference in her wife and what that means for her and their relationship. I just love the exploration of these characters and their relationship so much. I thought it was so beautifully done, and I really love ocean horror to a different level. Like, I've been obsessed with the ocean since I was a child. I had ocean dictionaries that I would read for fun, and that's just who I was as a kid, okay? I loved the ocean, and I still love the ocean to this day. So this one definitely kind of had like that ocean element that I really love, but also this kind of nuanced character exploration, and something about that combination really just did something for me, and it just worked and clicked for me. So I had to include this one on my top 10. Okay, so we kind of have a wild card here that you would never expect to be my top 10 because it's not something that explores characters really in depth, or something that scared me, or something that was like a beautiful storytelling. It's none of those things. Is this quality literature? No. But did I absolutely adore it anyways? 100%. And that is The Perfect Marriage by Geneva Rose. Yes, I know. But I love this one so much. It got me straight out of a reading slump. And again, this is one that I read earlier this year, and that has really stuck with me. Like, I want to reread this one so bad. We follow a woman who is a high profile attorney. She is a defense lawyer, and she, you know, is really good at her job. And one day her husband ends up getting arrested. And so he was actually arrested on murder charges for his mistress. And this is the first time that our main character is finding out that he even has a mistress. Even though she found out that he has a mistress, she believes that she is the only person that can defend him, because she actually does not believe that he is the one who murdered her. So she ends up basically becoming his defense attorney, which is very unethical. But this one is packed with twists, twist after twist after twist. I was constantly gagged and gooped at every single page, and that's what I was looking for. And so this one is really just one that stuck in my mind because of all the twists and turns. I just adored this one. And then the very last page had me so like on a different level of shocked. I was gagged, okay? And so I just keep thinking about this one every day because it just had me gagged so hard. And I remember that last twist. Even some of my favorite books that I remember loving the twist so much in the stories, I still don't even remember some of them all the time. Like, some of them I'm just like, what even were the twists in that book? I remember there being twists. I remember loving the twists, but what were they? This one, I'll never forget. Something about that last page twist is gonna get me every time. Now we're moving into the last 5, and I would honestly say like this top 5 is pretty good representation of my actual top 5. And so first up is Cirque Berserk. I know that I feel like this is another kind of like surprise wild card because they both don't have too much substance to them. But this one actually does have a little bit of substance, more than that one and more than the average slasher in my opinion. So this one follows a group of teenagers, and they are basically out for like their senior night or whatever, their senior day, and they have this car rented for however long till the next day. And they're like, okay, senior day kind of sucked. We should do something wild and something interesting. So they end up going to this like this shut down circus called Cirque Berserk that was shut down back in the 80s because these group of workers, teenage workers that worked there, went on a murderous rampage and then were never seen again. So people kind of speculate that, you know, they just disappeared, whatever, they're off living their lives. And then other people believe that they really haunt like the circus carnival because some people still go missing every single year around this carnival. I will say there is some slicing and there is some dicing because this is definitely a slasher, so you can definitely kind of guess which of the speculations are true and which ones are not. We also get the perspective of these teenagers in the 80s and why they did what they did and what led up to it. And I just love this one so much. I feel like it has a lot of commentary about abuse, and it's written by a Black author, so it talks about Black and Indigenous characters, which I've never seen in a slasher before either. So I just love that representation so much. And seeing myself represented in a fun little slasher that has a little bit of depth to it just meant so much to me. And so I had to like put this one on here because I just adore it so much for what it did for me. Next up, I have Tender is the Flesh, and this one really had me shook, okay? I was not anticipating to love this one as much as I did, but I really loved it, and especially when I began talking about it with other people and looking at reviews, my love for it just grew more and more. In this world, basically animal meat has become toxic to humans, so they have begun farming humans for their meat because their meat is not toxic to other humans. And we follow our main character as he works at a meat processing plant, and obviously what comes with that, because the meat processing plant is not animals, it's humans. And while you may think that this book is about like veganism or trying to push that, I really didn't get that at all. To me, this was a very, very big kind of allegory for capitalism and how capitalism does not care about us, how we are just kind of cogs in a machine, and how nobody cares about us. We are out here on our own, and even though we may think that we can trust people, we may think that we can trust the system, we actually can't. And I just love that so much, but I feel like there's many different interpretations that you could take of this story. And I will say the main guy in this, he does start to kind of feel a little bit of not remorse, but kind of like some curiosity, some emotions around what he's doing. And that adds a lot into the story. I just love this one so much. The very end of this had me in tears because everything that you thought you knew about the entire story got flipped on its head at the very end. And this one, I'm such a big proponent of like capitalism sucks. The fact that I was able to connect this to capitalism just really made this book mean a lot to me. Another one that meant a lot to me is Monstrilio. This one is one that was very heartbreaking. This is about grief. We follow different people, but in the beginning we follow the mother of a child who died. This child was probably around like 10, 11 years old, and they actually had a lung condition. I think they were only born with one lung and it was small, so they knew eventually that he was probably going to pass away. They just didn't know when, and he ended up lasting like years longer than he was supposed to. He was supposed to die almost instantly after birth, and he didn't. So they had a lot of hope that he would, you know, be able to live a much longer life, but unfortunately he did pass away. And so in this culture, there is this tradition of kind of taking a piece of the body of your loved one, and there's also kind of like a, not a rumor, but like a maybe spiritual belief that it could potentially grow. And so she ends up taking a piece of this lung of her child, or the entire lung, and it ends up growing into something. And she's not sure what it is, or if it's her son or not, or if it's something else completely. But we follow different characters as they are dealing with not only their grief, but then also trying to grapple with this idea that there is this other creature now that they have to take care of that is not necessarily human, but it's not human, and it's definitely has its own feelings and thoughts, and it's sentient, but it's not human. And is it really their son, or is it not their son? So they're dealing with a lot, and it's all just one big metaphor for grief. And I have not really dealt with grief personally in my own life, but it's something that is like very scary to me, and I just can't imagine losing someone that close to me because I've never gone through it. And so something about grief horror really hits me hard because I just can't imagine the pain, and so it's really cathartic for me to read stories about grief so I can kind of like prepare myself for what will eventually happen in the future. So this one really hit home for me. My second to last book that I have is Slewfoot by Brom. This one really surprised me again because I read it towards the beginning of the year. It's again stuck with me the entire year. But this one is a historical horror, which I've actually come to realize that I really like. I don't really like historical settings in many instances, but I love it in horror. And so this one takes place actually in 1666 in, I believe, like one of the colonies in Connecticut. And there is a woman, and she has a husband that ends up passing away. And because of this, she has to basically take on his estate. And she is actually left very vulnerable because nobody in this town likes her. She was kind of on the outskirts. She was never originally part of this community, but she married into it. And she, again, lives on the outskirts, so she doesn't go to church as often as everybody else. And this is an extremely religious time, an extremely religious community. So this has, again, a lot of religious trauma, but also showing how religion turns people away and just kind of banishes them when they don't adhere exactly to what their religion wants or their idea of who you should be. And so there's also a dark spirit that awakens called Slewfoot in the forest, and he is, or they, I should say, they don't really remember much about who they are, what they are, anything, and they are also very vulnerable, and the only person that they could turn to for help is Abatha, our main character. And they basically kind of unite together and find solace in each other when they are isolated and alone. And this is very much like a good for her story towards the end. I loved the end of this so much. I was like, okay, Abatha, period. Eat 'em up, eat 'em up. Literally, she was eating. Like, she did what she needed to do. She came, she delivered, and you know what? I'm proud of her. And I just was so shocked at how much I love this one. I love the story so much, and it was like slower, but I just absolutely adored it. And my absolute favorite book of the year is All the Sinners Bleed by S.A. Cosby. I just love this one so much, okay? So this one, honestly, I feel like is very similar in vibes, almost to Midnight is the Darkest Hour. But this one just clicked for me. It just worked in a way that I just cannot get over. S.A. Cosby, one might call him Sean Andre Cosby, because, you know, him and I are locked in like that. I love this book so much. So basically, we follow a sheriff, a black sheriff in this town. He's the first black sheriff in the history of this town, and this is a very small town, so nothing really goes on. There's been like 2 murders in a year, and that's it. But there's actually now a year later, after he's been elected, there was a murder of a teacher by a former student. And they were like, what was the reason behind this? Well, obviously they're looking into it, and our main character Titus, who is the black sheriff, he basically unearths a very dark history that has been going on within the town, and also a serial killer that's been hiding in plain sight. This one is very fast paced, but we're also getting to know Titus extremely well, and he literally has like a history in the FBI, and I just loved Titus so much. And Sean Andre Cosby is able to weave into these fast-paced stories so much heart and love and commentary. You could tell he loves writing. You could tell he loves his characters. And something about this one just worked for me. It's like literally if S.A. Cosby wrote a Karen Slaughter book, and that's the way that I keep pitching it to everybody, because that's literally how it is. It's dark, it's depraved, but it has so much heart and care woven into the story, and it's fast paced. It has this really intense commentary, and I just loved it so much. I love the way that S.A. Cosby writes. I just love all of his books intensely, but this one happens to be just my favorite of his because of the plot. It just worked for me so well. If you can handle the trigger warnings, I highly recommend picking this one up, because it is just phenomenal. It blows everything out the water, and I think that this one is one that can be liked by so many different people, but it is just so phenomenal, and I just love it so much, and I can't get over it. Like, this book will stick with me forever, and I cannot wait to reread it. So those are all my favorite books of this year. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know what your favorite books of the year are. If you agree with me on any of these, or if any of these were in your worst books of the year, let me know too, because we can duke it out in the comments, you know what I'm saying? Especially about this one. If you say anything bad about this one, you're free to. You're free in the comments to talk all the shit that you want, but be prepared. Be prepared, because I will go hard for Sean Andre Cosby, okay? That being said, if you made it to the end, leave the little hand heart emoji or any kind of heart emoji down below, and I will see y'all in my next one. Bye, everybody.
I'm writing rhymes in the kitchen, soaking the moments we live in, yeah. You got the nerve to be on me, faking your life for the hurt you